What are the pollsters and pundits missing this time around? Hi, I'm Scott Ott, and this episode of Right Angle is brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. I'm here with my colleagues Stephen Green and Bill Whittle himself. And gentlemen, there's a story in Axios by VandeHei and Mike Allen that is under the headline, Boats, Flags, and Merchandise, Trump is Core to Supporters' Identity. And I'll get into the details of the story a little bit, but the interesting thing to me was in the setup, they said this: if President Trump defies today's swing state polls and pulls off another upset, what will we have missed that could have been a clue? And so they're actually recognizing that they missed something in 2016 and kind of in advance now saying, well, what is it we're going to miss this time around? Although they don't think that eventuality is going to come to pass. And then it says, here's a big one. Trump flotillas, Trump flags bigger than American flags, Trump truck rallies, Trump shirts, Trump underwear, lawns that don't have a Trump-Pence sign or two, but 50 or even 100, a forest of them. A popular hat at rural convenience stores apparently says, if you don't like Trump, then you probably won't like me. And so the thrust of the story, Bill Whittle, is that these people have kind of made being a Trump supporter a core element of their own identity. And whatever you think of that phenomenon, VandeHei and Mike Allen are basically saying, are we once again missing an undercurrent of the American culture, what you have once called, unlikely voters that are doing something that is, nobody was spray painting Obama on their own boat before, and now these people are actually making their own Trump merchandise in many cases. Bill, is this what you think the pollsters and pundits are missing, or is it something else?
Well, first, let's talk about what the article insinuates. First of all, that Trump people are basically mindless automatons who are just buying it. They say our identity is tied into Trump, like we don't have any other identity. We're just Trump bots, and we like him because he's a xenophobe and a homophobe and all those other things. So there's that aspect to it. What they're also doing is when they say things like, if Trump should pull this incredible upset, once again, they're preparing the battle space for the argument that Trump stole the election. They're prepping the battle space for the whole Russian thing. They're doing all of this. In my opinion, Trump has been ahead by miles and miles and miles the whole time. Here in Los Angeles, you don't see any Trump bumper stickers because your car will be keyed. And so every time I drive down the freeway, I say to myself, any car that doesn't have a bumper sticker on it is a Trump supporter. And living in a city where since '88 now, where I've seen where virtue signaling is an Olympic event, I have not seen Biden stickers. I've seen people buy a car, I've seen people buy like a 2016 or 2017 car and put an Obama sticker on it. You know what I mean? But there are no Biden stickers out here. So what he's basically saying, Scott, is that contrary to the latest polls, there seems to be some enthusiasm among Trump voters. And there is a lot of enthusiasm among Trump voters, and it's contrasted by the utter lack of enthusiasm about Joe Biden. And this somehow is going to be part of the mystery upset that they will not be able to fathom. How could they have missed the signs? Joe Biden drops in from helicopter, answers one pre-canned question. He's there for 8 minutes and leaves. Donald Trump is having rallies where people drive for 500 miles to get there, and they're turning people away, and it'll be an utter mystery to them how they could have missed this subtle sign. Elections are about enthusiasm. It's that simple. And this is a no contest as far as I'm concerned.
Now, Steve Green, it's interesting here because this is kind of a meta story when you think about it, because they're actually writing about how they're not going to get it. And so they're acknowledging in advance that they will fail to understand the reason why their guy lost. There's a under the heading "Why It Matters," it says, to his diehard supporters, Trump isn't just a candidate. He's a lifestyle choice and a vehicle for self-expression, a way to continually flip the middle finger at big media, big business, big government, anything big. Of course, not anything huge, but big. And then there's an editor from Axios whose quote was this, I thought was interesting, Steve. There's never been a president whose brand was branding. Do you think Do you think that this idea of Donald Trump managing to kind of rise above or beyond politics and literally become a brand unto himself that people identify with, to the extent that they'll deface their automobiles and their boats and they'll get themselves tattooed? I saw a guy on my way home from work a couple of weeks ago standing on the median strip on El Dorado Parkway, waving a great big Trump flag. It was night. He was he was out there in the middle of the street waving a flag, and he was alone. The next day I came home, and it was daylight when I came home the next day, and there were like 5 people out there, several of whom were waving flags. So he was recruiting people. This is an extraordinary phenomenon. How do you account for that if you're a pundit or a pollster?
Well, before I get to that, let me answer the first part of your question. My grandfather, Green, suffered from macular degeneration. And starting in his 50s, he started losing his eyesight from the center out, where the macula just deteriorates over time, until all that he was left with for probably the last 25 or 30 years of his life was his peripheral vision. That's all he had. Out here and right here, that was nothing here, because it was like the blind spots converged, but just the outside. And he told me the strangest thing when he retired and moved out to the suburbs from the city of St. Louis. His new condo had a bedroom with very high ceilings, and he told me that when he woke up before the sunrise, if he laid on his back in bed, just as the sun was coming up, there was something about the height of the ceiling and the low level of light in the room. He couldn't replicate it by turning on lamps or anything, that he could, in a sense, see the blind spot. He could see with his peripheral vision, essentially a black floating orb just below the ceiling. And the thing about this is, under this one condition, he could see, in a sense, his blind spot, but under no conditions would he ever be able to see what was in it. And I think that's where our media is on this stuff. There is such a groupthink in the modern left, and such a disdain for everybody else. And we see this all the time. Hillary Clinton's comments about Trump voters being irredeemable, which is about, at least in Christianity, about the lowest insult you could possibly say about anybody. We saw it from Barack Obama, who referred to similar people as bitter clingers. And this isn't a personality cult or anything like that. It isn't wrapped up in anybody's identity. Well, maybe a few. But what this is it's a genuine enthusiasm for people who have been belittled and disdained and despised by our national media for years, by our presidential candidate, by the Democratic presidential candidates, at least in the form of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. I think you can make a case for John Kerry as well. In fact, you can make a case for John Kerry, because he's the guy who said that if you don't go to college and get a good degree, you end up in Iraq. There is
stuck.
Pardon?
Stuck in Iraq.
Stuck in Iraq. That's right. There is a lot of disdain. And here's Donald Trump, who started off as a fairly moderate Democrat, if he had to put a label on him. He's, a New York real estate developer and a billionaire, at least we believe he is. And you would not think that this is the person who would appeal to folks down in Texas or in the heartland of Pennsylvania or any of these other places. But as clumsy as he can be with his language sometimes, he does speak the working man's language. He has what used to be called the common touch. I'm not sure I actually like that phrase. I don't think I've ever liked that phrase, but it's an important phrase, and it's a real phrase, especially in American politics. And to be recognized, Scott, after a decade, 2 decades, maybe 3 decades of being not just ignored, but worse, being despised and publicly humiliated by your so-called betters in Washington and New York and Hollywood, to endure that year after year after year, and then to have this guy come along and say, you know what, you're pretty great. Well, you know what? After 4 years of that, I'm getting enthused too, my friend.
I have to add, in the interest of fairness, that Biden has the common touch as well.
There's no common person he hasn't touched. Here's what I think they're missing. And this comes from personal experience. I did not vote for Donald Trump in the last election. I would really love to not vote for Donald Trump in this election. And I'll be honest with you, unlike what is enthusing a lot of people, how he speaks, how he gives the middle finger to big media or stuff like that, frankly, I don't care for any of that stuff. I just think there's no need for it. It doesn't gain anything, and it's just a sideshow. That said, I think what the media is missing is not what Donald Trump has said or how he is, but what he has done. And that's what is going to make an impression upon voters who may not be enthusiastic about Donald Trump, but they look at the contrast and they say, well, what do I want? Do I want Joe Biden and more taxes and more regulation and more government control of health care and more wasted money going into federal programs that are supposedly going to save us from the curse of oil when they really just piss away vast amounts of money on technologies that won't be ready for another 100 years and really should be funded by private industry? Or am I going to vote for a guy who actually did what every president said he was going to do and moved the embassy to Jerusalem? Am I going to vote for a guy who somehow got the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain to come to the table? On the day we record this, there was a signing ceremony at the White House for an agreement between Israel and the UAE, and then another kind of agreement between Israel and Bahrain, and more Arab countries sure to come on board in that process. Am I going to vote for somebody who's actually been able to reduce regulation? Am I going to vote for somebody who is actually able to cut taxes? Am I going to vote for somebody who finally realized that he was dealing with thugs in Iran and treated them as such? That is much more significant to me than the sideshow. And in my view, I think what the media is all caught up in is the sideshow by Donald Trump's design. He wants them to be caught up in that. But what's really interesting for a voter is what he's been able to accomplish. And it's primarily things that A, he said he was going to do, B, others have said they were going to do but didn't, and C, that there is more to do, including more conservative judges on the court. If they don't get a hold of that pretty quickly, I think what's going to surprise them is that the people that they thought were relatively intelligent and would not go in for, wearing a flag like a bathrobe as you stand on the deck of your boat, going at 20 knots across a lake in a parade, a flotilla of Donald Trump boats. It's going to be the people they thought that they had a connection with and the people they thought were smart who are going to vote for that clown that they thought was not. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making this possible.